Hello guys, today we'll discuss how to paint the food. I'm sorry, but for this artwork, I will never show you the reference. And believe me, you don't want to see it. I always start by mixing colors that I'll be using. When I make a skin color, it's always a mix of yellow ochre, cadmium red medium, burnt umber, ivory black, and white. You can substitute yellow ochre for any yellow that you have. I use this exact paint color because it's not saturated and closer to a natural tint of the skin, so you don't need to worry about how much you added. You can choose any red because there is nothing special about my version of it. The same applies to burnt umber, which is a warm brown color. Ivory black is the color that I prefer to use to cool down the mixes. The reason for that is the same as with yellow ochre. Ivory black, when mixed with white, creates a bluish-gray color, which is perfect if you need to cool the skin tone, because it looks natural. With that palette, you can't go to extremes. It's both good and bad, because you can't create a unique saturated palette, but it's perfect if you want to keep it soft and natural looking. I mix as many colors as I wanted to. It can be 3 colors or 5 or even 10. Usually for the skin, I mix 3 to 5 colors. It depends on what I feel will look interesting and on how many drastically different colors we have. I don't have a certain belief in how many colors you should have, but what I know is these colors should represent different values. As a minimum, I do one mix for the light, one as a middle color, and one for the dark. I found it useless to create a few mixes of the same value but with different hues. It takes a few seconds to change the hue of the color, while making the color lighter or darker takes a lot more time. Sometimes I don't even use the paint that I premixed and create a new one in the process of work, so don't overstress this part of the process. Sadly, I didn't film a process of drawing on canvas. I was using a graphite pencil. I erased all the supporting lines that I've used to draw the food. I prefer to keep the outline clean because otherwise the graphite can mix with paint and stain it. Usually I go over the outline with a diluted paint, but for some reason I didn't do it at that moment. Honestly, I can't say why. The drawing part usually takes a lot of time and requires a lot of correction. If you draw on the canvas, you have to be very careful. I use a very soft graphite pencil. Usually it's at least 4B. I tilt the pencil a bit, so I draw with the side of the graphite rather than the tip. You can easily scratch the layer of primer with the sharp tip of the pencil. I try to be careful because these scratches can lead to paint cracking in the future. In this case, I was using a special oil paper. The texture of it can be easily damaged if you'll be erasing too hard, so try to keep the lines soft. I think that I already went too far in talking about pencils, so it's time to return to the painting part. I start by adding colors. I'm not trying to make them perfect. I simplify and think about big areas. Where is the light? What is in the middle and where the dark is? I also think about the difference between them. Usually the light is cooler, the middle part is warmer, the transition between the middle color and the dark one is cooler, and the shadow is warm. That's what I keep in mind when selecting hues. And we shouldn't forget about the difference in temperature between parts of the food. Those usually appear warmer than the top part. You'll see that for the upper part, I'll be using more bluish colors, which is the mix of ivory black and white. And for the toes, I'll be adding much more red. The shadow colors will be a mix of burnt umber and red. I just keep adding paint. And I think that in each and every one of my videos, I'll keep stating how much it is important to fill the canvas with paint before you'll start to judge what you see. Everything is relative. Who has never tasted bitter doesn't know what sweet is like. And the same with colors. You can't know if the red for the toes is saturated enough if you don't see the whole picture. It can look extremely saturated if the near color is blue. And also the same color can look washed if there is a more interesting red somewhere there. The first step of filling the canvas is the most exciting part of the process because I don't know how the painting will look like. Maybe it will be a masterpiece or a failure. Who knows? Also, it's a good moment to experiment. Most of my red will be concentrated on the toes. However, we need to keep the balance. That's why I've added some red to the heel and made the transition into cool light. Also, later I'll add some red to the side of the foot. Sometimes when you keep hues that different, like the top is blue and the toes are red, you lose the bond between them. And it may seem that these are separate parts. To avoid this effect, I add some cool colors from the top part to the nails, and some red from the toes to the top. We've already talked about cool parts like light and warmth. I have to mention that some traditional painting schools prefer hue changes to be easily noticeable, while others make only a slight change, so that the color is not cool, it's just a tiny bit cooler than the ones that are next to it. Of course, it depends on your style. There is no right or wrong option. If you want to know my opinion, I would recommend for a beginner to play with hues and create more differences between colors. You can emphasize them even if you can't see that on the reference. Basically, there are two types of artworks that I do. One is for studying and the other one is for pleasure. The colors for studies I try to mix as close to the reference as possible. It happens when I'm in love with colors on someone else's painting or photograph or real life. That's when I'm trying to find a perfect match, the same exact tint, and I can spend a lot of time mixing, adjusting, and fixing. When it comes to my personal artworks, I am freer from the reference. I rather use it as an inspiration for the shape, a guide for values. The reference in this case helps me to create an artwork, not dictates what I should do and how. This painting is an example of my own art, not study. Initially, the painting planned to be more realistic and less soft. But when I started to mix palette, I understood that I want to make this foot look sweet so badly. But it's supposed to look dirty and hairy. I think that it's useful to nail both approaches. Be good at picking the perfect color from the reference. And at the same time, be able to come off this and do your own, something that will convey your vision. For some reason, I didn't film a small portion of the process. I've been changing the color for the shadow a few times. It was important for me that it would look good with the plain background and colors of the foot. You can see that I've almost finished the first two toes. Everything that I did was mixing in between colors and applying them. I also added more red because, well, I love adding red paint. Now I keep adding more and more details. I use my old fluffy brush for blending because it's soft and it's easy to move paint without leaving brush strokes. This is a very soothing part of the process because everything that I do is just mix and blend. At this point, I can already see the result, so it becomes easier and less creative. When you paint toes or fingers, try to simplify the shape. The toe is a cylinder, so the sides are darker than the middle part. As I've mentioned before, try to vary the temperature of colors. Choose something cooler for lights and warmer for darks, and vice versa. And don't forget about the variety. You can see that the darker colors at the top of the toe area are more yellow, while the lower ones have more red. It's common for artists to keep bold brushstrokes for light parts and blend everything else. It emphasizes the feeling of the 3D shape. Also, it's a good way to remind the viewer that this is a painting and not a photograph. I like to leave some imperfections so all nails will look well, closer to reality, imperfect. Here is the finished version of the painting. I've added a few brush strokes with a big bristle brush. And also keep a few bold brush strokes as highlights on toes. I hope that this video was useful. Don't forget to share your thoughts or questions or anything that you want in comments. Exclusive tutorials, real-time process, references, and more you can find on my Patreon. Thank you for watching this lesson. I hope that you liked it. See ya!